The Penguins made a couple of signings on Monday. Hunter and I are going to discuss those, as well as look back on a marvelous season for captain Sidney Crosby.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Patrick Damp. You can follow me on Twitter at synonym for wet. Joined as always by the one and only Hunter Hodes. You can follow him on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. You can give our show's account a follow at LO_Penguins. And we thank you for making this your first listen or watch of the day, because we're your team every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube. And today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I've got a competitive side, and it's a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on the classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or Google Play. So here we are, little bit of news from the Penguins on Monday. They made a couple of, I would say, minor signings for the roster, bringing back Sam Poulin on a 2-year, $775,000 deal, as well as signing goaltender Filip Larsson to a 2-year, $775,000 deal, And I don't know that this says a whole lot overall about the direction of the team going into next year. Obviously, Sam Poulin up and down from the AHL the last couple of years. He's been a bit of a project for this team since he was drafted. Meanwhile, Filip Larsson's going to fill out some goaltending depth. He's been in and around just about everywhere. We were talking about that before we hit record, Hunter. So overall, let's start with Sam Poulin. Pretty typical deal, 2 years, $775,000. It's a two-way deal. He makes that much at the NHL level. I had the numbers and then my screen went blank on what he's going to make at the AHL level. But overall, this does kind of feel like, as I've joked about him many of times, this is the last chance saloon for Sam Poulin. Had a solid year in the AHL with Wilkes-Barre this year, 16 goals, 15 assists for 31 points in 41 games. But then on the other side of it, when he got his call up near the end of the season this year, didn't really do a whole lot with it. So overall, Hunter, your thoughts on Sam Poulin?
Yeah, I think this is truly the last dance for him with this organization, especially if it doesn't work out. I mean, we all saw what Kyle Dubas said after the season, that they are going to give him every opportunity to make this team out of training camp, and they expect him to push for a spot on the full-time team for next year. And he did have a really good year in the AHL. He was deserving of a call-up numerous times throughout the season. I know he was bypassed for some other players that came up, but once he did come up, he didn't do that much to stand out. I just didn't see that much in those 3 games that he played that made me think, oh, he's really going to come and just kick a lot of butt next season. He's going to have to earn it in camp and in the preseason if he wants to be on this team on a full-time basis for next year. I understand that people will say, you just got to give him that chance. You got to give him that chance. Okay, I get that. But I still overall haven't seen enough from him, even though it's been a small sample size, to have a take where I'm like, okay, I think he's going to be a real difference maker in the bottom 6. I guess I'm just at the point where I want to see it to truly believe it.
That's kind of where I am on him. I said it during the season when he came up. I understand people's frustration with Mike Sullivan and how he has a quick hook on young players. But as I've said before as well, that's not just a Mike Sullivan-centric problem. That's an NHL coach problem.
He also has to deploy him, and I think other players a bit better. I mean, he was playing him on the 4th line. You're really not going to learn that much that way, especially with veterans, but I want to see him deployed a bit better, maybe deploy him for more offensive zone draws, for example, just because I feel like he uses the bottom 6 a lot. This isn't just the 4th line. He uses the bottom 6 a lot in defensive zone situations. Use them a little bit more in offensive zone situations, especially if you want to be a team that runs 4 lines, I think that's something that Sullivan does have to clean up a little bit heading into next season. So I think if you do want this to work, deployment for him and a lot of players in the bottom 6 has to change.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was building towards overall. But the other point is, when he got his moments in the lineup this past season, he didn't stand out at all. Was he bad? No, but he also wasn't good. He was just there. And given the pedigree and level of expectation that this organization had for Sam Poulin after drafting him, that's not good enough. Now, obviously, like you said, I agree. They need to deploy him better. They need to put him in better situations to succeed. But at the same time, you do have to help yourself at certain moments. You have to, whether it's throw a hit, make a good defensive play, look good on the forecheck, get a scoring chance or two. You have to do something to stand out, because we look at a guy who came up this year and built his way up the lineup. You have Valtteri Puustinen, who not a lot of people were, outside of the true sickos, not a lot of people were talking about, but he came in and made himself somewhat undeniable, that they had to keep playing him. You can say the same thing with Jesse Puljujärvi over the last few weeks. He began to make himself undeniable. And Sam Poulin, while yes, was not given much of an opportunity, eventually has to take that step to force the coaching staff to put him in more advantageous situations. Meanwhile, the team also announced, as I said, the signing of goaltender Filip Larsson, same exact deal as Sam Poulin, 2 years, $775K. And he has kind of played just about everywhere. He has played in the AHL, in the ECHL, the NCAA. He most recently was in the top Swedish league, where he put up some solid numbers in 28 games, 1.93 goals against average, 920 save percentage, 5 shutouts, as I said, across 28 games. Now, again, that's only 28 games. That's in a league that's lesser than, I would say, the NHL and the AHL, but still very good numbers for a goalie who is only 25 years old.
He also played really well in the playoffs for his team as well, Pat. 1.91 goals against average, 929 save percentage, and a shutout. He also earned a spot on the Swedish international team. And in 3 games, 1.97 goals against average, 915 save percentage. He has really built up his game over the last few years, just because it was only 4 years ago he was playing in the Danish Pro League, just because he had been so banged up for so long and his numbers had dipped so much. But he's been able to work on his game, get up to the top Swedish league, play really well in the playoffs, then get to that international team and continue to play well. It's awesome that he earned a contract with another NHL team. And I think this kind of signals to me a little bit that they may look at him as the starter in Wilkes-Barre next year, especially if they are committed to Blomqvist coming up to back up Jarry or whoever the starting netminder is going to be. Obviously, this is also good goaltending depth overall. You need to shore up your organization with good goaltender depth. But I definitely think, at least I'm thinking a little bit, that he might be the favorite to start for Wilkes-Barre if Blomqvist goes and blows everyone away in camp in the preseason.
That's kind of the mindset I'm in as well. I think this signals that they're going to give Joel Blomqvist just about every opportunity to make the big club out of camp, rather than have him in waiting in the AHL. And this kind of opens a door for Larsson to be Wilkes-Barre's starter going into next year, and just an insurance policy. Say if Jarry gets hurt or gets dealt, or Blomqvist gets hurt and gets dealt, or whatever happens with Alex Nedeljkovic in this offseason, because we've talked about it, there is a world where he could return, but it all hinges on what happens with Tristan Jarry. So it's very good goaltending depth and a nice bit of business by Kyle Dubas, getting a goaltender who, like I said, is only 25 and in the top Swedish league puts up very solid numbers and makes the international team. So that's a guy who, at only 25 years old, I would say has some solid upside and potential if things go south with Blomqvist, if you eventually move on from Jarry and you need some help. It's a guy that maybe can come up to the NHL level and give you a handful of starts.
Right. I think if you are severely banged up at the position, he'll be the third goalie that comes up. Like you saw, Blomqvist came up a couple of times this year when both Ned and Jarry were really battling illnesses. But I don't think this player is going to be in the NHL next season. I do think if he has a really strong season in Wilkes-Barre, the season after this one, you could see him maybe in a backup role in the NHL, or maybe he starts another season in Wilkes-Barre, at least to start, then maybe comes up. But I'm curious to see how his game translates back over to North America after playing overseas for quite a while.
For sure. It's a very interesting signing. I'm a fan of both signings. I think at this point, you shore up some depth with some cheap contracts for a couple of years, and you hope that they can turn into some upside rather than just guys you keep buried in the minors. But that's going to do it for this first segment of the Locked On Penguins podcast. When we come back, it's time for another season in review. Who else but the captain, Sidney Crosby? Hunter and I are going to talk about his season and more right after this. But first, we got to tell you about our first sponsor, and that is Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying, flag on the play. You've already talked about that, but there is just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, and there is so much to get, including unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the board with, hilarious emojis for taunting your friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine, and there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. All right, we're back here on the Tuesday edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am Patrick Damp, joined as always by Hunter Hodes, and no need to delay the inevitable anymore. We are in full off-season mode here, so that means we're going to do some season in reviews. So why put it off any longer? Let's talk about another marvelous season by the captain, Sidney Crosby. Once again, leads the team in points with 94, puts up 42 goals, 52 assists to go with it, moves into the top 10 all-time in scoring, as well as puts up his 1,000th career assists. And it's just, I'm almost out of things to say when it comes to Crosby and his greatness. He's 36 years old. He'll be 37 once next season gets here. And I mean, this was just a great all-around season for the captain. Obviously, we know about the power play struggles. Do not put a lot of those on him. It was more the whole unit as a whole. But you can imagine him getting another 100-point season had that power play even been average. But just in general, I've been saying it all season long. One thing that separates the greats from the absolute legendary is that players like Sidney Crosby pull their team into the fight. And when this team was in the doldrums mid-season, he was doing everything in his power to keep their heads above water and doing so much to keep this team alive when they looked very much dead.
Yeah, man. I mean, it really sucks that the Penguins wasted 2 incredible seasons from Sidney Crosby in a row, because if they had made the playoffs in just one, or heck, even both of those seasons, I think we would have seen 2 vintage Crosby playoff performances, because it's been rare when he hasn't performed in the playoffs. And he did everything in his power to try and will this team into the playoffs. And outside of a few other select players, a lot of the other players weren't living up to the billing in terms of helping this team get into the playoffs as well. Underlying numbers wise, when he was on the ice this season, the Penguins had 55% of the shot attempts, 77 goals for, 74 goals against. You are going to see a lot of love for him to get the Selke, and he could be a finalist. The data is at least decent, but I think this is Sasha Barkov's award to lose. I think he's by far the best two-way center in the league. I would kind of be surprised if Barkov did not win it. But going back to Sid, 781 scoring chances for, 623 scoring chances against, right around the number that he was at last season. And then when he was on the ice, the Penguins had also a little over 56% of the high danger chances. He was setting up chances to a beautiful degree every single night. Chances were going in. He was scoring on his own chances as well. But the big thing that I come back to, you kind of hinted at this when you were talking, he only had 23 points on the power play. You take those points away, 71 even strength points this year. He was a menace at 5-on-5. And it didn't really matter who was on his line. Even when Jake got traded after that, he was still kicking so much better. Yeah, he was a bit off for a few games, but right after that, he got right into playoff mode and did everything in his power to give this team a chance heading into its final game of the season against the New York Islanders. And if this power play had just been average or even a little below average, 18th, 19th, 20th, he would have had 110, 115 points this season. We'd be talking a lot more, honestly, about potentially him being a nominee for the Hart Trophy, even though they didn't make the playoffs. I mean, he was probably going to be a finalist had they snuck their way in, but at 115 points for someone who's 36, I think that'd be a little hard for someone to leave off their Hart Trophy finalist ballot. I know there's a finalist, but if he was able to get that many points and have this power play be a bit better, you'd be hard pressed, I think, to find a lot of people who vote on this award to leave him off their top 3.
Oh yeah, he would have had a much stronger case with 15, 20 more points, a better power play, and sneaking into the playoffs. The other thing I want to highlight about his season this year is faceoff percentage. He finished the season with a 58.2% faceoff percentage, which is his best mark since 2009-10, where he had 55.9%. And I know that kind of feels a little nitpicky, a little bit like we're just looking for something to talk about how great he was. But again, we have seen one of the problems this team has had over the past couple of years has been puck possession and being able to possess the puck against their opponents for long stretches of time. And you know that Sidney Crosby gets deployed pretty much in all 3 zones. So if he's able to go out there, win the faceoff, and give his team possession right off the jump, that puts them ahead of the curve. And it's also just, it's another moment where, and I know this happened already years and years ago, where whenever there's a critique of Sidney Crosby's game, he obsesses over it. And this whole, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that. Well, he's a great playmaker, but he doesn't score a lot of goals. Goes out and wins the Rocket. Well, he's not great in the defensive zone. Goes out and becomes a tremendous two-way center. And then even a handful of years ago, he's not that great in the faceoff circle, despite his offensive and defensive work. Not that good in the faceoff circle. Goes out and wins nearly 60% of his draws this year. And you look at his marks from his entire career, he has only finished under 50% 4 times. And even those, except for one season in 05-06, was he greatly under 50% when he had 45.5. Then you look at his under 50% years, it's 49.8, 48.2. So he has become one of the better faceoff men in the NHL, and that's a huge part of his game.
We just got to get him to win these draws in overtime now, Pat. I mean, he's been so great at it during regulation, but once 3-on-3 overtime comes out and he's out there, it feels like he loses the draw more often than he wins it. And I want to see him fine tune that a little bit. There's something, I guess, to critique about Sidney Crosby. Maybe it's working on the overtime faceoff so the Penguins can get the possession to start overtime, which could hopefully lead to this team not dropping so many overtime points throughout a season.
Yeah, and we know how big of a problem that was this season. They were just awful in overtime, and it cost them a ton of points and kept them out of the playoffs. But that's going to do it for this first part of the season in review for Sidney Crosby. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about Crosby and how long realistically do we think that Sidney Crosby can keep this up. But before we do that, we're going to tell you about our next sponsor, and that is FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and in the NHL, and baseball is in full swing. FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, we're back here on the Tuesday edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm Patrick Damp. That's Hunter Hodes. And we just got done talking about what a marvelous season Sidney Crosby had at age 36. He will be 37 going into next season. we're pretty much fully expecting there to be an extension signed on July 1st or just days after that. All signs point to Sidney Crosby extending his contract with the Pittsburgh Penguins and finishing his career in one uniform. I actually want to kind of start there before we get into how long do we realistically think that he can do this. One of the things that I'm getting tired of, and we have talked it to death, is the whole like, oh, is he going to go elsewhere? Is he going to go elsewhere? And I'm not going to talk about that. I'm not going to talk about, oh, is he going to go chase another cup with his buddy Nathan McKinnon or anything like that. It's pretty much known that if there's one thing Sidney Crosby keeps in mind but doesn't talk about, is his legacy. You look at the way he plays on the international level. He always brings it for Team Canada. We as Americans still have the deep heartbreak from the golden goal in 2010. We saw how he played in that goofy 2016 World Cup of Hockey. Best player on the ice, probably by a mile, wins the MVP. Canada wins it. He's got another gold medal to go along with it. He's probably going to be on Team Canada for the World Championships this coming summer. And you know how much he wanted to win the Stanley Cup after winning it in 2009 as a Penguin to cement his legacy as one of the all-time greats. One of the things that come along with that is playing your entire career in one uniform. And for me, that's why I think the extension's coming. I don't think Sidney Crosby wants to become that bar trivia guy of like, oh yeah, he played 20 some odd years with the Pittsburgh Penguins. But do you remember those weird couple of years where he was with like Colorado and then St. Louis and Boston and then LA? Like, I don't think he wants to become one of those guys.
Agreed. And you can honestly say that about the rest of the core as well, Pat. Evgeny Malkin and Chris Letang, they all came in together, and I think they all want to go out together with the same organization. I know there are some fans out there that don't like that. They want the team to get started in the rebuild. They want to blow this whole thing up. They're like, okay, go chase a cup with someone else, finish your career, your last couple of years with a different team. To a degree, I guess I get it a little bit, but I just don't subscribe to that notion. I know there is a chance that they may not see the playoffs. Again, there's definitely a real chance based on, what could happen this summer. Other teams could improve. The score is getting older, all that other stuff. But it still means a lot to me, and I think a lot of other people, that Sid and this core all go out together just because of everything they've done throughout the last, almost 20 years at this point. It still just means that much to me overall. So yes, I do think there's at least a little bit of an argument for people who are saying, well, you could blow it up now, you could blow it up now. I don't agree with it just because I do think there's at least a little more to be had with this core. They've shown an ability to play at a high level over these last couple of years where they just need a little bit of help throughout the rest of the lineup, and I think this team can get back to the playoffs. I know I'm probably veering off track at least a little bit, but I think retiring as a Penguin means a lot to Crosby with everything he's given to this organization, and you are going to see that happen. I think there's a chance it'll be July 1. Could it be his birthday on August 7th? I mean, that's a very real possibility, and it also means a lot to Evgeny Malkin and Chris Letang just because they signed extensions a couple of years ago. I think knowing that Sid would also join them when his turn for an extension is coming, and I think you're going to see that happen just because it means that much to all three of them that they all go out together.
Yeah, and that's fine to veer off from it a little bit because I wrote a column about this on KDKA over the weekend called "Do you want to win the Stanley Cup or do you want to win the offseason?" And my point was this: like, I understand everybody's willingness in discussion of should they run into a rebuild now since they've missed the playoffs 2 years in a row. It's not an unfair question and it's not an unfair discussion because you miss the playoffs 2 years running. Something's not working, but we're getting kind of in a way back to those post 2009 years where you would watch Crosby, Malkin, and Letang have really good seasons. And then everybody's like, well, you got to move Malkin or you got to move Letang, or at the time you got to move Fleury. And you look at the way they performed and you're like, okay, they were not the problem. And again, you look at this past season, Crosby, Malkin, and Letang were not the problem. 94 points for Sid, 67 for Gino, 51 for Chris Letang. And now the onus is on ownership and management to build better depth around them. Yes, they cannot carry a team the way they once did, but guess what? They're all on contracts that are right there in line with their production.
They're bargains.
Like
a lot of these contracts are bargains, man. That's what it is.
It's not like you're paying them 10, 11, 12 million and you're only getting 67 points out of Evgeny Malkin and 51 points out of Chris Letang. You're going to give Sidney Crosby a raise because he's finally earned a raise and the cap is going up. But again, to bring it back to Crosby, do you really see a 15, 20, 25, 30 point drop coming from him? Maybe in 2-3 years, but next year he's going to hum right along and do what he always does. It might not be 94 points. It might be 85. It might be something in that realm. But again, you're going to have a rising salary cap and you're going to have a top 6 supporting cast for the most part that does their job. Now you have to build the depth out.
Right. And with how he trains during the offseason, he's not going to allow himself to have a massive drop off next season, even though he's going to be 37. He's going to have Brian Rust returning, who had an incredible year for the Penguins this year. No matter who else is on his wing, whether it's Drew O'Connor or someone else they bring in from outside the organization, whether it's a free agent or a trade, that player is hopefully going to be a really good fit for Crosby. And I think it's just going to be ho-hum for him overall. I still expect a point per game season out of him next season. I think he's going to give you at least 82 to 85 points. If you can get 90 plus again, that would be awesome. Heck, Pat, if you can get 100 plus again, that would be the dream right there. And by the end of the season, you're going to see him at least 9th all time in scoring. Right now, he's at 1,596 points. Joe Sakic is at 1,641 points. He will definitely pass Sakic for next season. After that, he'll be focusing on Mario, 1,723 points. Sid is going to pass him by the time his career ends. So just wanted to put out some record stuff out there to end my little tirade there. But yeah, I still expect 82 to 85 points at least from him next season. I don't think he's going to have this big drop off that I've seen a couple other people out there suggest. I just don't think that's going to happen.
No, I can't see it for him. He's in way too good a shape. He's way too talented and way too passionate and proud about what he does. Overall, to put a fine point on it, I mean, I think this is going to be very Tom Brady-esque. I think he's going to play till he's about 40. I think it's going to, we've talked about it on the show before when we talked about his extension. I think it's going to line up right there with Malkin and Letang, and the three of them are going to ride off into the sunset. And then in the next decade, we're going to see those 3 numbers go up into the rafters at PPG Paints Arena.
Agreed. He's very much the Tom Brady of the NHL. He's also very much the LeBron James of the NHL as well, with how consistent he's been. I mean, LeBron is kind of similar in age, and he was doing everything in his power to will the Lakers over the Nuggets. I know the Lakers just lost in 5 games this week, but Sid is very similar to those players in that regard.
For sure. But that is going to do it for the Tuesday edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Hunter and I will be back tomorrow to do some more season in reviews, as well as bring you any news the Penguins might make between now and then. But for now, for Hunter Hodes, I am Patrick Damp. Thank you as always for tuning in, and we will be back on Wednesday.